Question 2, section B, is a knowledge-based paper, and we're looking at life for the German people 1933 to 39 here. You've got to recall your knowledge and answer the questions. The bigger question will be question D at the end. Maybe do this one first to bank the marks. This first question, question 2A, is about family life. It's worth 2 marks, so don't spend too long on it. So let's crack on. What does this picture show you about Nazi attitudes towards family life? A couple of points needed. It's a family portrait that encourages family life. It shows you that the Nazis valued family life. It shows you that Hitler and the Nazis wanted German people to have many children. That the ideal Nazi, and I mean ideal, not every, was tall, fair, blonde, with fair skin and blue eyes. You could also allude or deduce from the source that the mother was responsible for looking after the children. Why? Because she's breastfeeding, taking care of the children. You could also state that there were specific gender roles within the Nazi attitude, that certain sexes should do certain things. The woman taking care of the children, the girl with her dolly, the boy hands-on, doing something constructive on the ground. The picture suggests a happy and prosperous family, children playing, pets, food, everything appears happy and calm. The ideal German family. But move on quickly. Question B. Describe how the Nazis dealt with the German economic problems. Do not spend too long on this question and write an essay. You'll run out of time. You need accurate and detailed description of how they dealt with this economic problem they inherited. Firstly, Schacht, the economic minister, had a policy of deficit spending using Miefel bills to fund a massive public works programme to tackle the high level of unemployment. Basically, this stopped inflation. It was credit notes given out, deficit spending, using money that isn't there really, funded by the German Reichsbank, and you can convert the credit note into Reichsmarks, which meant people had money to spend, to invest, to start up businesses, etc., to get the German economy going again. Secondly, you could say that men were put to work building houses, schools and hospitals and motorways. The National Labour Service, RAD, meant that for 6 months workers lived in camps, wore uniforms, were militaristic but had low pay. But they felt they were doing something for the country. This hid unemployment, or helped unemployment, and gave people hope and purpose. So it helped kickstart the economy by keeping unemployment down low and giving workers some wages compared to having no wages before the Nazis came into power. So young men aged 18 to 25 were made to join the National Labour Service, or RAD, engaged in tree planting, dam building, etc. Also, you could add that in 1936 Göring introduced a 4-year plan. The emphasis was on rearmament. You know that in 1935 Hitler ordered the expansion of the German armed forces and conscription was introduced. You know that Germany re-entered the Rhineland, and so Germany was on a footing for war, preparing for war. This kick-started the economy. The reintroduction of conscription in 1935 meant that men were paid to join the army and the military service. Heavy industry grew, so coal, chemical usage went up. Oil, iron and steel usage trebled. Billions was spent on producing tanks, aircraft and ships, keeping men in employment. This helped to stimulate the economy, give people jobs and solve the economic problem. Finally, there was the notion of invisible unemployment. Jews no longer had jobs by the middle of the 1930s. They were dismissed from them and had their land confiscated, wealth confiscated. This helped kickstart the economy and solve the economic problems. It kept unemployment down, the source of the economic problem. Unmarried men under 25s were pushed into the National Labour Scheme, as we've discussed. Women gave up their jobs or were dismissed or forced to give up their jobs. And opponents of the Nazi regimes were held in concentration camps, trade unionists, political activists, anyone who spoke out against the Nazis, intellects who were a threat to the Nazis. This created jobs for other people to fill, again keeping unemployment down. This was known as invisible unemployment, but it meant there was less people claiming unemployment benefit, more people working, more people with money to spend. This meant that the German economic problem was being solved. Question C is 2 parts, both worth 4 marks. Please don't write massive essays on both questions. You'll run out of time. So, number 1, explain why the Nazis used propaganda and censorship. You know this, we've studied it recently. Again, to get 4 marks, you have to explain why, not just describe the different propaganda that they used, such as radios, Nazi rallies, posters, arts, education, school textbooks, literature, newspapers, etc., speeches. You need to explain why they used propaganda and censorship. Well, firstly, they wanted to brainwash and indoctrinate the German people into accepting and believing the Nazi beliefs and values. Let's be right about it, they weren't the sort of values and beliefs you could just impose upon people. You had to subtly manipulate people to believe them. Propaganda was essential to hammer home the Nazi message, therefore. Censorship ensured that the German people only read, heard what the Nazis and Goebbels, the propaganda minister, wanted them to know. So newspapers were heavily censored or Nazified, controlled by the Nazis. It was all about control. Control of books, magazines, music, films, everything. They used it to keep their power. The more invisible propaganda was and censorship was, the better. The more people followed the Nazi beliefs without realising they were being manipulated, the better for them. If they wanted to really undertake their racial policy and their aggressive foreign policy in rearmament and future war, then they would have to have the German population either on their side and believing in them, or living in fear of them. Hence why they use propaganda and censorship. Part 2. Explain why the Nazis introduced measures against the Jews between 1933 and 1939. Well guys, we did this today, so you should be able to answer this question and gain 4 marks. Firstly, in explaining why, the Jews were scapegoats to Hitler. He needed a common enemy to unite the German people. They were blamed for all of the problems facing Germany by the early 1930s. The unemployment, hyperinflation in 1923, the Treaty of Versailles, the First World War, the stab in the back myth. Hitler therefore spelled out his views on the Jews in Mein Kampf in 1924, and he had to make this real. The Nazi racial policy and ideology also meant that Hitler had to take measures against the Jews. For example, if he really wanted people to believe in the Nazi racial creed and the Nazi ladder of social evolution, racial evolution, he had to use propaganda and take measures against the Jewish population to dehumanise and limit their role in society. He wanted to marginalise them, take away their rights to be a German citizen. It was also because of money, to confiscate their money and their wealth and their land. It was also down to jealousy. Hitler and the Nazis were jealous of the prominent positions that the Jews held in Germany. History was also another reason. As you know, dating back to medieval times, anti-Semitism had been quite rife in Europe. The Jews have been persecuted since the days of Jesus, and before that. The Romans had persecuted the Jews. Hitler based a lot of his persecution on what had happened over centuries and centuries of history. Remember, the Jews had been blamed for the death of Jesus Christ. This was another reason why measures were taken against the Jews, or justified why the measures were taken against the Jews. Finally, the last question is a 10-mark question. So you really need to be on this question and finishing it. You need a two-sided answer. Did life under Nazi rule benefit all people living in Germany between 1933 and 39? You need a full answer. You've got the time and the space to do this. Plan it first. Tick off what you're going to write after you've written it. Your argument needs to be balanced. Of course, for many people, life improved. People had wages, food, stability, good leadership. Good leadership in the sense that Germany recovered economically. Many people benefited from Nazi rule. Nazi followers, party members, unemployment figures were cut, public work schemes and rearmament. Workers were receiving benefits from being good workers, such as the Volkswagen scheme, the Strength Through Joy movement. For many people, life improved. From hyperinflation 1923 to high unemployment 1929, life was better. The other side, though, the other side of the argument is that life grew worse. Trade unionists, political activists, political opponents, many were murdered, put into concentration camps, and never seen again. Life under the Gestapo and the SS was very harsh and brutal. Many people had to speak through a flower, say only good things. It was a time of fear and a time where people worried about what their neighbours would say about them. Teachers and intellects had to be very, very careful. So for many people who weren't members of the Nazi Party or followed them, they lived in fear and they had to remain silent. So it wasn't a good time for everybody. Again, to get a really good mark on this, you have to balance your answer. You have to state that for Jewish people, the Nuremberg Laws of 1935 and Kristallnacht 1938 meant they were really targeted and persecuted against and systematically dehumanised. Black people, gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, the sterilisation of the mentally ill and the physically disabled meant that these people did not benefit under Nazi rule. However, many women benefited and believed they were really doing good for Germany, giving birth to Aryan Germans and increasing the population. But for many other women, the 3Ks were a chore and meant that they felt imprisoned and that their lives were not as fulfilling as they once were. So balance the argument. For many people, life improved, but for non-Aryans living in Germany, life became quite harsh and very, very difficult. A large percentage of Germans did benefit from Nazi rule because millions were given jobs in public works through conscription and through the National Labour Service, RAD. Cheap holidays, the Volkswagen car, being loyal citizens. But the other flip of the coin was non-Aryans, non-Germans suffered through a very, very cruel and harsh racial policy. Good luck.